All right, folks, we are in chapter 23 of the first book of Samuel. What's happened so far is in the previous chapter, King Saul, and specifically one of his men, Doeg, slaughtered 70 priests, and then he completely obliterated their town and killed everyone. Babies, kids, old people, young people, everyone is dead. Except for one person, one of the sons of Ahimelech. His name is Abiathar. He escaped. And of course, he went to David, right? So that's what's going on here. Extremely fast-paced. The last few chapters have been just David running away, fighting for his life, really. People getting murdered left and right. He saved his parents. So this chapter is no different. So this one is chapter 23, and I'm going to start with the first few 6 verses, 1 through 6. That is 7 verses, but let's just go with that. Then they told David, saying, "Behold, the Philistines fight against Keilah, and they rob the threshing floors." Therefore David inquired of the Lord, saying, "Shall I go and smite the Philistines?" And the Lord said unto David, "Go and smite the Philistines, and save Keilah." And David's men said unto him, "Behold, we be afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we come to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines?" Then David inquired of the Lord yet again. And the Lord answered him and said, "Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into thine hand." So David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines and brought away their cattle and smote them with a great slaughter. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. And it came to pass when Abiathar the son of Ahimelech fled to David to Keilah that he came down with an ephod in his hand. Okay? So what's going on here in plain English is David hears that the Philistines are fighting against Keilah. So Keilah is a very economically successful, wealthy town. Obviously, they have a threshing floor. It's in the lowlands of Judah, and it is unfortunately right on the border, right on the Philistine border. So what that means that it's incredibly militarily vulnerable. So of course, in that area, if you didn't know, just like any other border town, they get blitzed all the time, right? And as we'll find out in a little bit, this is a walled city, okay? There's a reason why this city is walled, right? Because it's a border town, it's economically thriving, but it's militarily vulnerable. So David hears that they are in trouble, they're in distress. Who told him that? We're not exactly told, but as I said previously, he's got around 400 men with him. Now, this town is Judean. Those men are more than likely Judean. So it's probably someone within that group of men that has relatives. One way or another, he gets word, right? So he inquires of God and says, "Do I go and help them out? Do I go and fight the Philistines?" God says, "Yes, go," right? So he goes and tells his men. Well, guess what? His men are afraid, right? They're afraid. They're saying, "We're afraid here in Judah, in our own country. How are we going to go down and fight the Philistine armies on the border town," right? That's kind of crazy. So David inquires of the Lord again. And the Lord tells him again, "Go, I will deliver them into your hands," right? So David does. He fought with the Philistines and brought away their cattle and smote them with a great slaughter. So essentially what happens here is David and his men go down and defeat the armies of the Philistines, right? So at this point, of course, this is not David's kingdom. At this point, this is Saul's kingdom. The Philistines' armies are very strong, right? They're very strong, and they continue to be strong for quite a while. So once again, he goes and defeats them, and then we have this random, and will come in place later, but we have this random sentencing. It came to pass when Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, fled to David to Keilah, that he came down with an ephod in his hand. All right? So one thing that I want to mention here is that at this point, David is undefeated, and it's not just at this point that David is undefeated. In fact, David is undefeated right up until he dies. So he's never defeated. This is extraordinary in the Bible. There are no kings with this sheer volume of fighting, for sure. With this sheer volume of fighting, there are absolutely no kings that are undefeated. There are a few, for example, his son, but his son Solomon inherited the kingdom, and then, of course, he screwed up, and judgment was pronounced on him. But the kingdom did not really split up until after Solomon. So Solomon also didn't fight any battles, right? The vast majority of kings that fought battles didn't fight nearly as many battles. What's remarkable about David is that he just simply never lost a single one. What's even more extraordinary is that he fought well into his old age. So he was in his 60s when he fought his last battle. And I want to just read to you how this went. So again, this is later on, and I'll get to it one day, I'm sure. But I just want to read to you this one because I think this is an appropriate place to read that. So again, this is decades later, potentially 4 decades later. It's very difficult to determine, but for sure it's within 5 to 10 years of his death. So he was in his early to mid 60s when this battle occurred down the road, right? And once again, he's fighting the Philistines. And by the way, the Philistines are not the only ones that he defeated, right? He defeated the Amorites, he defeated the Ammonites, he defeated the Amalekites. I mean, he just opened up a can of whoop-ass all over the place. And he continued physically fighting, as I will read to you, right up until a few years before his death. So here's how this one goes. This is in the second book of Samuel. Now, Samuel dies a couple of chapters later in the first book from the one I'm reading. But the second book of Samuel, it's called the second book of Samuel, and more than likely Nathan the prophet wrote it. So another prophet wrote this one. So here's how it goes. And you can tell there's a slight difference in the style and syntax. Very interesting. But here's how this one goes. Moreover, the Philistines had yet war again with Israel, and David went down and his servants with him and fought against the Philistines. And David waxed faint, and Ishbi-benob, which was of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight, he being girded with a new sword, thought to have slain David, but Abishai the son of Zeruiah succored him and smote the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David... Okay, so I want to just go back here a little bit and just kind of translate what's going on here because... once again, King James Version language, it's extraordinary, brilliant, beautiful syntax, but some of the diction, some of the words that are used are a little bit hard to understand. So just to repeat that real quick, moreover, the Philistines had yet war again with Israel. So again, another war, no kidding. And David went down and his servants with him, right? His army went down and fought against the Philistines, and David waxed faint. So let me just explain to you what waxed faint means. And of course, if you read one of the newer translations, you know exactly what that means. But I want to kind of explain to you what waxed faint means. The word waxed means got. So waxed faint, faint means weak. So he got weak, or if it says, for example, waxed stronger, he got stronger, right? Or if it says waxed weaker, right? He got weaker. So waxed means simply, it's kind of like wax, Brazilian wax, that kind of wax. But in this case, it's used in Old English is got for some reason. I cannot tell you why that is, but he waxed faint. So he didn't get defeated. This is extremely precise language. He didn't get defeated. He didn't get wounded, right? Because there are many kings down the road, as we'll see, dozens of kings. Some get wounded, get back in their chariot, and bleed to death on the way back home. He didn't get shot, right? Shot by an archer. All that happened here is he just simply waxed faint. He just got weak. He got tired, okay? Age caught up with the guy, man. He's a mortal human being, right? And then what's even more incredible is that, guess ironically, because this is huge irony right here, right? Guess who he's fighting ironically? Here's how that goes. And Ishbi Benob. Now, I hope he excuses me for slaughtering his name. No puns intended here, right? This is how his name is. Ishbi Benob. I mean, he's a Philistine, so they have different names. Which was of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight. Right? So this is one of the sons of, guess who? Goliath. So David, decades later, is literally fighting the sons of Goliath. So Goliath, obviously, was his first battle. Guess who his last battle was? It was one of the sons of Goliath, or at the very least, one of the sons of the giant whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight. There were, by the way, brothers. There were brothers of Goliath. So we can't for 100% sure say that and claim that this is the Goliath or one of his brothers, but based on the way the text reads, it is unequivocal here. So in his last battle, David is fighting one of the sons of the giant, and here's what it says about him, the sons of the giant. He being girded with a new sword, thought to have slain David. So first of all, being girded with a new sword. So the guy's got a new sword, right? He's got a new toy, and he is thought to have slain. So of course, in Old English, thought to have or thought to do something means you intend to. It doesn't mean thought that he had slain him or he had killed him. It just means he thought to have slain him, means he was intending, he was gunning for him, right? He was gunning for him to kill him with his new sword, knowing who David was. Of course, everyone knew who David was at that time. I mean, especially after decades, of course, this area is not huge. So we're talking about, a few million people, but he was an extraordinary general. He had built, and then king, he had built a military war machine, the blueprint of which we use to this day, right? David's military was absolutely innovative and incredible at that time. He had, just to give you an example, and I'll talk about his military one day. I'll dedicate an entire video on that, but he had a personal bodyguard that was comprised of foreigners, right? So these foreigners, and they were outside of the tribes of Israel. So that's, of course, a brilliant thought. They were his personal bodyguard. So think about something like nowadays, for example, in the United States, we use the Secret Service, right? They are exclusively tasked with the protection of the President of the United States, right? So that's completely outside of the standing military, right? Completely outside of special forces. So he had special forces, those are his mighty men. He had a standing military, and then he had the Peletites and the Cherethites with Benaiah being over those people, over that guard that just guarded him personally, right? Personally guarded him at all times, and they were foreign. That type of prototype was further down the road employed by who? By everybody, right? The Ottomans employed that. The Romans employed that, right? The Ottomans had the Janissaries, right? Those Janissaries, that idea came from David. And then, of course, the Vatican today uses the Swiss Guard, which supposedly, right, they're foreign troops that guard the Pope or whatever they guard out there. But that whole idea came from David, and that his brilliance is just absolutely astounding, right? And we use that type of blueprint to this day, not to mention that he created a military orchestra, right? He had hundreds of people that played all kinds of music. I'm sure he used them for fun as well, but whatever. So anyway, this was his last battle. How do we know that it was his last battle? Is because, guess what happened? But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, succored him. Succored means helped, right? Abishai, the son of Zeruiah. Zeruiah, and I talked about that a while back, but this is an extremely powerful family. Zeruiah is David's sister, okay? So Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, at this point is one of his main bodyguards. He's one of his closest military personnel next to him, right? The son of Zeruiah. So Abishai is essentially his nephew, right? His nephew, and of course, as I mentioned, Zeruiah potentially is older, much older than David, because he was the youngest. So Zeruiah, Zeruiah's son, who is, in other words, David's nephew, is probably a decade or two younger than David. At this point, they've been around for decades as warriors, very competent warriors. So he helps him and smote the Philistine and killed him. And here's what happens next. Then the men of David swear unto him, saying, Thou shalt go no more out with us to battle, that thou quench not the light of Israel. Right? So they consider him to be the light of Israel, and they're just simply, they have a little intervention over here, right? Group intervention, and they say, Thou shalt go no more out with us to battle, that thou quench not the light of Israel. So obviously, David is a mortal man. He's getting old. Age is catching up with him. So they tell him, okay, just go retire. Live in peace. Enjoy your, 150 wives or however many wives he had. Just don't go out and fight with us anymore. We got this, right? Extraordinary. But of course, the irony here is that, first of all, whatever his name is, I can't pronounce it, but he's got a new sword. Of course, we talked about the sword of Goliath the last few times. And then he's the son of the giant whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight. So describing his father, right? And then he gets wiped off the face of the earth again. Another thing that is extremely interesting is that David never, ever ran away from battle. So now, of course, he's running away from King Saul, and I should probably clarify that he never ran away from enemies, okay? So he ran away from King Saul, strategically ran away. King Saul is God's anointed, and David has a lot of respect for King Saul because God anointed King Saul, okay? King Saul was there for a reason. So he would have never went against, he would have never went into battle with King Saul. And of course, there's a questionable moment down later on when David lives in Ziklag, and then he tries to join the Philistines against Saul. No one really knows the motives at that point, and I'll talk about that later. But the idea is that he never ran away from his enemies. He strategically retreated from King Saul. Of course, King Saul is a powerful king. He's a Benjamite, right? He is from one of the tribes of Israel. The second time David ran away, or strategically really left the city of Jerusalem because he didn't want a bloodbath in it, was whenever his son Absalom attempted to usurp the kingdom. So that was the only other time that David retreated. And of course, it wasn't an enemy, it was his own son, right? His own son with one of his first wives, who was a queen. So, and I'll talk about Absalom a whole lot. That's an incredible story. And Absalom himself is an incredible person, and David loved him a whole lot. And again, he did not want that bloodbath, so he just simply left, right? He left the city with an entourage, and then, of course, to David's chagrin, Absalom was killed in battle, right? Of course, the armies were not defeated at all. The armies of David were not defeated at all throughout his life. Okay, so here's what happens next. And it was told Saul that David was come to Keilah. And Saul said, God hath delivered him into mine hand, for he is shut in by entering into a town that had gates and bars. And Saul called all the people together to war, to go down to Keilah, to besiege David and his men. And David knew that Saul secretly practiced mischief against him. And he said to Abiathar the priest, Bring hither the ephod. Then said David, O Lord God of Israel, thy servants hath certainly heard that Saul seeketh to come to Keilah to destroy the city for my sake. Will the men of Keilah deliver me up into his hand? Will Saul come down, as thy servant hath heard? O Lord God of Israel, I beseech thee, tell thy servant. And the Lord said, He will come down. Then said David, Will the men of Keilah deliver me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, They will deliver thee up Then David and his men, which were about 600, arose and departed out of Keilah, and went whithersoever they could go. And it was told Saul that David was escaped from Keilah, and he forbare to go forth. And David abode in the wilderness in strongholds, and remained in a mountain in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God delivered him not into his hand. Okay, so that's a long little stretch here, about 8 verses. So what happens here is David lives, he abides in Keilah, this walled city. After he destroys the Philistines that are stealing from the threshing floor, right? So Saul hears of this and then says, God has delivered him into my hands, right? For he's shut in by entering into a town that had gates and bars. So as I told you earlier, Keilah is a walled-in city. So whenever Saul hears that David is in that walled city, he's like, I got him, right? I got him. I can go in there, surround that city, wipe them off the face of the map, and kill him as well, because then he's walled in, right? He is just simply cornered. Well, David knows or feels somehow that this is what's going on. And then he gets the ephod, that Abiathar, the priest, that, I guess, linen kind of overall, whatever it is. Hard to imagine what they look like. I'm sure somebody knows. But either way, he inquires of God, right? And God tells him, well, they will give you up, okay? These people here will give you up. So, and this is interesting. Is this a case of no good deed goes unpunished kind of stuff, right? I mean, David obviously saved these people from the Philistines, from stealing from their threshing floor. But God tells him they will give you up, right? And it's not as easy as you might think. It's not as obvious. What's going on here is this is a small town, right? A small city. King Saul is extremely powerful. He's a Benjamite. That town is still in his territory, even though it's a Judean town. And they know the brutality of King Saul. They're just essentially pitted against a rock and a hard place here. And now they don't know that at this point. God just simply providentially tells David, they will give you up, right? And King David's like, okay, well, I'll get out of here, right? I mean, he leaves. And at this point, he's got 600 men. If you recall earlier, he had 400. Now he's got 600. So he's slowly accumulating quite the army here. Of course, nothing like what King Saul has, nor what the Philistines have. But he departed out of Keilah and went whithersoever they could go. And then King Saul hears that David has left Keilah. And then he says, I'm not going to go there and bother with this. And then David goes and remained in a mountain in the wilderness of Ziph. So once again, that Keilah border town is between the Judah lowlands bordering Philistine territory, and then he's going into the wilderness. So he's going into a essentially not nearly as nice of a place. I mean, this was a walled-in city. I'm sure they had fun out there for a while, especially after the battle was won. So he remains in strongholds, right? God delivers him one more time with that ephod, I guess. He prayed in it. I don't know. I wish I had one of those over here. I wish I had an ephod I barely have any clothes on, but you know what I'm saying. Just a piece of cloth over there over a shirt. God help me. Well, David was David, all right? We can't compete with that guy. I mean, I told you, he's undefeated. Oh, man. All right, so here's what happens next. This one is verses 15 through 18, a little bit fewer verses here. And David saw that Saul was come out to seek his life. And David was in the wilderness of Ziph in a wood. And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David into the wood and strengthened his hand in God. And he said unto him, Fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find thee. And thou shalt be king over Israel, and I shall be next unto thee. And that also Saul my father knoweth. And that also, so my father knoweth. And they two made a covenant before the Lord, and David abode in the wood, and Jonathan went to his house. Right? What a friend, right? I mean, once again, I talked about the friendship between these two. Jonathan is absolutely incredible. What's fascinating is that he knows the truth, right? He knows that David has been anointed. He knows that David is going to be king one day. And he also here very prophetically, very interestingly says, and my father Saul also knows that, right? He also knows that. So difficult to determine what is the motivation of King Saul to just keep pursuing David, right? To trying to kill him, knowing that David is one day going to be king. Is he that delusional, or is he that? I mean, he's really, and we're going to find out over the next few chapters how he just absolutely loses it and does all kinds of insane things. But just the fact that Jonathan says that, of course, Jonathan doesn't compete against David, right? He knows what's going to happen. He knows the truth. He knows that there's no way out of this. And then, unfortunately, he gets one thing right. He gets one thing right, that David is going to be king, but he doesn't get the other thing right? What does he say? And I shall be next unto thee. So he tells David, you're going to be king and I'll be next to you, right? Well, unfortunately, that's not how it goes. Of course, we know that. Jonathan dies in battle, right? Just a few chapters later, Jonathan dies in battle. And that, unfortunately, does not come to fruition. It is really sad, right? I mean, they're extremely good friends. So, yeah, enjoy your friends. I mean, let me tell you something. Enjoy your friends, because not everyone makes it out alive. And I do practice what I preach, at least in this regard, okay? I don't practice everything I preach, let me just tell you that much. But I do enjoy my friends, and let me tell you something. I am very, very blessed, and may God bless them. I have incredible friends. They know who they are. I don't have to even name them, because they know to just simply walk in, okay? They just simply walk in. Like, you have no idea what you can encounter in here if you just simply walk in. I don't recommend that, so that's a warning to them. Please knock on the door. And I try to lock it, but, every now and then I will just simply forget, so I don't want to frighten them to death. And but they also knock on my door at all times in the evening, or alternatively, driving by, they just will ring me up and let's go. Well, what do I do? Okay, what do I do? I want to enjoy my friends, so I go, and occasionally I regret that, okay? I regret that for the next day or two. And, we have a lot of fun. I hate to say it, but probably more than a handful of bars do not allow us in. So it's that kind of fun. I mean, nothing outrageous, but we should probably tone it down a little bit, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Well, anyway, I digress a little bit. Let's see what happens next. This is in verses 19 through 23. Then came up the Ziphites to Saul to Gibeah, saying, doth not David hide himself with us in strongholds in the wood, in the hill of Keilah, which is on the south of Jeshimon? Now therefore, O king, come down according to all the desire of thy soul, to come down, and our part shall be to deliver him into the king's hand. And Saul said, blessed be ye of the Lord, for ye have compassion on me. Go, I pray you, prepare yet, and know, and see his place where his haunt is, and who hath seen him there, for it is told me that he dealeth very subtly. See therefore, and take knowledge of all the lurking places where he hideth himself, and come ye again to me with a certainty, and I will go with you. And it shall come to pass, if he be in the land, that I will search him out throughout all the thousands of Judah. Right? So, once again, in the previous few verses, we learned that he is in the wilderness of Ziph, and here come the Ziphites to Saul, to Gibeah. So they literally go up to King Saul in his town. Remember, he's got this massive tree in Gibeah. And then they say, doesn't David hide himself right over there? So they're essentially telling him, he's hiding right over there. Why don't you come and get him, right? And then what's really fascinating here is that King Saul, for some reason, I mean, this is just absolutely outrageous. What does he say? Blessed be ye of the Lord, for ye have compassion on me. He's a lunatic, right? He's blessing people who are betraying someone that he is pursuing. And he's saying, bless you because you have compassion on me. What compassion? This is absolute insanity, right? I mean, you can start, and this actually progresses. It's almost like dementia. And you kind of start hearing things that just simply don't make sense. And then progressively, right, it just gets worse and worse and worse. The things that he says just don't make sense at all. What compassion? I talked about that last time. I mean, he's exhibiting some seriously sociopathic behavior. And this is another example, and it only gets worse, okay? And, you know, of course, his little spiel here, he's going to search him out, whatever, throughout all the thousands of Judah. So, anyway, this is how the chapter ends. And they arose and went to Ziph before Saul, but David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the plain on the south of Jeshimon. Saul also and his men went to seek him, and they told David, wherefore he came down into a rock and abode in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard it, he pursued after David in the wilderness of Maon. And Saul went on this side of the mountain, and David and his men on that side of the mountain. And David made haste to get away for fear of Saul. For Saul and his men compassed David and his men round about to take them. But there came messengers unto Saul, saying, haste thee, and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. Wherefore Saul returned from pursuing after David, and went against the Philistines. Therefore they call that place Selah Hemalekoth. And David went up from thence and dwelt in strongholds at En-gedi. All right, so of course, what happens here is Saul says, let's go. David starts running away once again, right? Retreats big time. What is very difficult with all these names is, of course, as an English speaker that is not from that area, or maybe even in the contemporary world, some of these places are not as clear-cut as they were back then. But what you're not able to picture is the situation that David is in. So this is kind of like a, and of course you can't picture that because I don't have pictures on your screen really. And this is hopefully an opportunity for you to use your imagination. I'm afraid that pictures just really ruin imaginations. I've said that before and I'll say it another 100 times. I think it's important for us to listen or read and interpret information and try to use our imagination. But if you were to take a look at the map of this area, because you know this is my sickness, so of course I've taken a look at a map of this area and these towns and these strongholds and this whatever wilderness that we know of where it is. It's essentially creating a pressure funnel, okay? So David escapes, and he's just slowly getting pushed towards the Dead Sea. Literally, he's got no escape at this point. No escape. It's this pressure funnel that's closing around on him, right? And then he's got nowhere to go at this point, him and his men. They compass David and his men round about to take them, but, so here's where deliverance comes, right? So think about it this way. They compass David round about, so he's essentially getting closed in from all directions, just nowhere to go. And if you were to see the map, you would see that. But there came a messenger unto Saul, saying, haste thee, hurry up, and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. Wherefore Saul returned from pursuing after David, and went against the Philistines. Therefore they called that place Selah Hamalakoth. You know, I forgot what this means. I looked it up at one point, but if in the Bible anywhere it says, therefore they called that place this and that, then it has a meaning to it that means, you know, something meaningful. And David went up from thence and dwelt in strongholds at En-Gedi. All right, so this type of salvation is very, very typical of God and how he assists his people in times of trouble. So, and just this happens way too many times. One that I can think of is the Assyrian king Sennacherib, hundreds of years later, right? Hundreds of years later. He sends one of his generals to threaten King Hezekiah of Judah. At that point, the kingdom was split. You got a northern kingdom with capital in Samaria called Israel, and the southern kingdom with the capital of Jerusalem called Judah. So the Assyrians are pressing hard. Of course, they eventually end up conquering that area, but not during that time, right? So Hezekiah prays to God for deliverance, and God does precisely, or almost very similarly, what he does here is he sends a rumor, right? So he distracts. It's slightly different in that case, but he essentially distracts the pursuer from the prey, and then they retreat so that Hezekiah and company get away, right? So it's very typical, nothing new here. It's happened before, and it will happen again. Whenever you're against the wall, someone, for some reason, just, oh, I got to go do something else. And then, well, there you are. You're good to go. All right, may you guys be blessed. I'll talk to you next time.